You're with Julian on the Brown Note and Ukraine. The truth about Ukraine, or at least some of it. So the Western media's narrative on Ukraine is at the moment Russia is muscling in this sovereign nation and going to invade, and basically they had a freedom fighter revolution there about 6 years ago, and you know, the Western world is screaming murder, and Russia has been trying to dominate this country, and this is not the truth at all, what's happening. I mean, I'm sure most people that are into politics know the famous world map of how many American bases are surrounding Russia. There are no Russian bases surrounding America when you want to talk about international aggression. Ukraine was part of the Soviet Empire, and an important part because it bordered the rest of Europe. So it was in that middle ground between the European nations and Russia. And since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Ukraine has made itself a friendly country to all sides. And the three main parties are the Western world, I think the CIS nations, or something Commonwealth of Independent States, which are the old Soviet countries that have their own sort of organisation. And then there's Russia as well, which has been pretty much Vladimir Putin's Russia. And they balanced it. They made this balancing act with all three. They wanted to be friends with everyone, and that lasted up until Western meddling. Our nation's meddling in the affairs of Ukraine. And Viktor Yanukovych, he was the president of Ukraine, and he was ousted in a freedom revolution called Revolution of Dignitary. He was ousted by a coup. He was ousted by an international coup backed by the United States. Now, this all came about because the Ukraine was negotiating with the European Union for, what was it called? The Ukraine Assistance Agreement, something like that, which was this huge economic, political agreement that the European Union was trying to have with the Ukraine. And there were lots of elements in it, such as you've got to lessen corruption, you've got to look after political prisoners, you've got to let Monsanto come into your... Wait, what? So there were lots of elements to this negotiating with the Ukraine. The Ukraine thought that it was it had to get involved in this thing with the European Union. Russia was saying, we're really not very happy about this at all. So there were lots of caveats involved, which was that Russia was going to punish Ukraine economically quite severely. The Ukraine's economy was for making this deal with Europe. And Ukraine was asking for relief for this as well. Now, the whole point of the Europeans' involvement in Ukraine had absolutely nothing to do with helping Ukraine. It had to do with America wanting... America has never stopped the Cold War against Russia. They have wanted to be involved in Russia forever, and then you've got the big business side of it that wanted to open up Ukraine to rape and pillage, basically. So the usual manifesting is that we will give you loads and loads of money, but you will let us come in and do what we want in your country. Now, the Ukraine in the end suspended this deal with Europe, and that was Viktor Yanukovych. He suspended it, and that was the trigger for this rioting that broke out in the streets and lasted for months and ended up with the overthrow of a democratically elected government. That's called a coup in any other country. It's not called freedom fighters. They were a democracy, and they had a democratically elected government that was overthrown. The European Union Ukraine Assistance Agreement was designed to give billions in loans to the Ukraine, which would then be foisted on the public forever. And it's to open up markets for plunderers from the wealthy European nations to come into your country, and to give up sovereignty to the European Union in an economic sense. There was no EU membership given to them if they accepted this deal, just all the bad bits. and they would still have to split from their two other biggest friends, which is Russia and the Commonwealth of Independent States, which are the old Soviet republics. This was going to cause so much damage to them economically, they were insisting on compensation from the European Union. Now, if you know anything about politics going back into the 1980s, you know how the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund work. They go to a country that's poor, they pressure them politically to accept billions in relief loans, which is then debt that's transferred onto the public to use as a tool to manipulate that country forever. And you then have to receive goods from those countries that gave you the loans. The classic example, and if you ever get a chance to watch the documentaries on Jamaica, Jamaica was nearly 100% self-sufficient, farming-wise, produced all its own goods. The forces from America made them accept billions in International Monetary Fund loans. They make sure that they promote politicians in those countries that are very receptive to these loans. And then the caveat of the loan is that all of the goods that America makes, which its taxpayers subsidise so heavily that wherever it arrives in the marketplace around the world, hello United Kingdom, it is cheaper because their taxpayers subsidise it so heavily. They flooded Jamaica with so many goods, the farmers were pouring milk down the drains, literally on camera. They couldn't sell anything. They became 100% reliant on imports from America. Their farming crashed to nothing. And then they had this enormous debt that they were saddled with. Some of the terms of the loan, the IMF wanted to stop Ukraine raising the minimum wage or the pension. These were demands. These were parts of the loan from the IMF. They demanded a 50% increase in gas prices and utilities and steep budget cuts. This is a piece from Joyce Nelson. Hidden from the mainstream media exposure, the World Bank and IMF loan has opened Ukraine up to major corporate inroads. Loan conditions are forcing the deeply indebted country to open up to GMO crops from Monsanto and lift the ban on private sector land ownership. Previously, foreign multinationals couldn't own land in Ukraine. The loan states, yes, you will. US corporations are jubilant at that gold mine that awaits them. The California-based Oakland Institute recently released a report revealing that the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, under terms, this is 2013-ish, under terms of their $17 billion loan to Ukraine, would open that country up to genetically modified crops and organisms. In late 2013, the then president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, rejected a European Union association agreement tied to the $17 billion IMF loan. Instead, Yanukovych chose a Russian aid package worth $15 billion. His decision, plus a discount on natural gas, not a 50% hike. His decision was a major factor in the deadly protests that led to him being ousted. Now, this was all about that government refusing to bend to the rules associated with that loan. And then we had riots breaking out. And then we had the Revolution of Dignitary, which was an entirely US-backed coup. Apparently, the people involved, a lot of the gunmen, were holed up in the American embassy in Ukraine, were using it as a base. And everyone makes out that like there were freedom fighters. We know that many people in the midst were indeed far-right groups, and they were overthrowing a democratically elected government. And they did this so that they could put military bases closer to Russia and to open up Ukraine to foreign powers and foreign business to come and own their land, own their valuable farmland, and companies like Monsanto could come in. That's it. That's what this whole thing has been about. There was no benefit to Ukraine for any of this. And Ukraine turned around and said, no, these terms are too egregious. We're not getting EU membership. We're losing a lot of money. You're stopping us raising our pensions and wages. You're making us sell our farmland to foreign multinationals. We're going to go with Russia. And we want our aid package there. So everyone in Europe and America started stirring up everything that happened in Ukraine and making out that it was this freedom battle. It had nothing to do with freedom. It was a coup for the same reasons that they've had coups in lots of other countries. Now, Russia has been treated as the aggressor here, but 1/3 of Ukraine are Russian, are ethnically Russian. Can you imagine if Russia had done this to a large island off the coast of America where 1/3 of the population were ethnically American, and they had come in and basically helped overthrow the government and insisted you take loans and all of this stuff so that your Russian companies can come into that company off the coast of America and own loads of land. And then the kicker is NATO. Russia has, if you look at a map, the Crimea section where Russia actually annexed part of Ukraine and took it and just said, nope, most of the people that live there are Russians. Across the sea is Russia. Can you imagine them feeling really great about having an American-backed Crimea looking at them across the water? And they make out that everyone else has been that Russia's been the aggressor here, when it's them again being surrounded by American bases. It was an illegal coup. The reason that this is currently happening now, the alleged aggression from Russia towards the Ukraine, that they're sending in troops to Belarus and that they're going to go over the border. To give you a very good example, Russia has spoken of a moment of truth in recasting its relationship with NATO and is demanding swift, point-by-point responses to its demands. Its main demand is to stop NATO's expansion any further east. For us, it's absolutely mandatory to ensure Ukraine never ever becomes a member of NATO. Moscow accuses NATO countries of pumping Ukraine with weapons and the US of stoking tensions. President Putin has complained Russia has nowhere further to retreat to. Do they think we'll sit idly by? So you've got this nation that was very friendly with Russia, that had a friendly government with Russia and with the West, overthrown by a US-backed coup, being pumped full of arms and money from Western nations, and the underlying ghost in the whole process, the elephant in the room, is that they want Ukraine to join NATO. Why? So that America can have bases in the Crimea across the water from Russia. That's it. That's why Russia is getting so upset about what's going on, because they keep saying stop trying to make Ukraine into a NATO nation that will then have NATO bases just across the sea from us where you can launch attacks on Russia. So now it's got to the point where Russia may well try and annex parts of the Ukraine to put a border further along. And Putin's language has been very clear there. Where can we retreat to further? America keeps pushing closer and closer. Virtually all of the a lot of that land, the Soviet republics that have now gone, America has tried to push into those lands by supporting Islamists in many cases. They've tried to creep up on Russia and have ringed it in military bases. But if Ukraine was a buffer for Russia, and would America stand by a coup on its doorstep with its mortal enemy? Its mortal enemy coming in and raping and pillaging the land and owning most of it and then sending military bases there? I don't think so. So it's very likely that there could well be an escalation in Ukraine, a military one, unless they back off with trying to turn Ukraine into a military member of NATO to use as the biggest military base in the world.